Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning into one of our talks today. I'm so thrilled today to be joined by Tamara Taylor to talk all about the NBC series Law and Order Organized Crime. And one of the things that was so delicious in watching your character and your performance on the show is you think you have her figured out as a viewer, and then you realize you have absolutely no idea who she is. And given that they were probably still working on a lot of the later scripts when you first started filming, what was the necessity of the collaboration that ended up happening on set in order for you to know a lot of those details to be able to play to them early on, even though they're not revealed until later episodes?
Well, it's interesting because I had a talk with Eileen Chaikin, the showrunner, and she kind of gave me, she's so lovely. She said, okay, there are some things you need to know that I must tell you. You call the hit on Stabler's wife. And I was like, what? I didn't know that when I got the job. Are you kidding? That's amazing. That's crazy. And it seemed like it kind of morphed. It took on a life of its own because, as you said, once you get on set, I think the writers have a really clear idea of where they want to go, and what the character arc is about. And then you get actors on set, and you start to see how they're playing off one another. And sometimes I think chemistry can be surprising. I think there were just a few elements that sort of shocked us all. I think they didn't expect that Angela would have a totally different chemistry with Stabler than she did with Richard. I think initially she started out, not, I don't want to say playing them both, but being 5 paces ahead of everybody. And she knew she knew who Stabler was based on what Richard had told her about him. So she knew, I think, initially how to sort of throw him off the scent, or the Wheatley trail. So she was going to sort of seduce him and throw him off. And then I think what happened with Angela is that she met Stabler and realized maybe there's something different going on here than I thought. And there was a certain honesty and earnestness that I think Stabler brought out of Angela. I think he sort of got to the heart of her pain and her grief in a way that Richard just never ever tapped into. So you see that there's a totally different dynamic between these two men and Angela. So I think that sort of informed, it was the springboard into the rest of the character arc.
Yeah. And with exactly how you were saying for the writers, once they see the actors on set and the chemistry that you all bring, that's also the same for you as an actor in working with Chris and working with Dylan as well, because you're all bringing things that you may not have anticipated. So when you're developing a character that's a new character coming into a show like Angela, how in depth and how specific do you want to get with certain choices versus the freedom of exploration that you really want to leave open, especially when you're working with two actors like that who are going to play?
Oh yeah. Well, I like to approach it as like a 50-50 split. Like I've sussed out who I think Angela is based on, and by the way, based on the limited information that they give you as an act. You see the first couple of scripts and you go, okay, I see her actions. Why do I think she's doing these things? And then of course, helpful conversations with Eileen, the initial one, was really helpful in terms of informing how to approach Angela. But then, like you said, so I've got 50% of the details I've sort of, colored in myself. And then you get on set and see what Chris and Dylan are bringing, and I sort of allowed myself to be fluid and react and play off of what they gave me. So it was really fun process, but I definitely had made some pretty clear decisions about Angela that hopefully played. I hope it worked.
And her relationship with the organized crime world in the show is so interesting because she's obviously divorced from Richard, but still, especially because of her kids' involvement, is constantly pulled back into that world a little bit more. But then when you think about their relationship dynamic, he's grown up in that world through his family lineage. Did you determine that she had been involved in any sort of criminal world before knowing him, or did you think of it as him being her introduction to that world and space in her past?
I felt like it was her introduction into that world, and the notion, and I think sort of the backstory that I was sort of given, and was that she and Richard had met in college. They were both mathematicians at the time. They were both studying math, and she had no clue where Richard came from or who he was. Fell in love and got married, and I think the issue came up when he said, I want your last name and I'm not going to give you mine. So I think she was brought into that world, and quite frankly, probably a little reluctantly, because she's a math professor. I don't think she wanted to be a mob wife. But she fell in love with who she fell in love with. And so I guess, sort of some people say, okay, well, I guess I'm along for the ride. And the notion is that she grew accustomed to that lifestyle, but didn't necessarily agree with what Richard did. And I think the notion was that she was sort of his moral compass a little bit. And that maybe she did the books and made sure that he stayed as clean as he could in this really sort of, diabolical realm.
And the elements of their divorce are quite interesting as well because you kind of imagine that she was the one to choose to leave, but also that came with a huge amount of risk and that she would have had to be pushed to a certain space because, as much as in the end of this season, she knows that he's going to retaliate against her. When she left him, she probably felt the same way as well. And so I think that's interesting in terms of the way that you've built her as this incredibly strong woman who really has a lot of volition in herself. She knows exactly who she is, and she knows how to make calculated risks and when she's making them.
Yeah.
And so how were you thinking about the contention of their divorce, particularly when you look at the details of how they separated things, custody of their kids, finances, and elements like that? She didn't walk away with nothing.
No, she clearly didn't walk away with nothing. And as written, Richard reminds her repeatedly that he left her. This is why I left you. This is why I left you. And it's funny because I do think that she probably let him leave her rather than leave him, because for those very reasons, because it was dangerous and not the best risk to take. So he left her, but she's definitely kept him close. And again, at the beginning of the season, the notion was that we aren't quite clear about what the nature of their relationship is. Are they still sleeping together? Do they still have a side thing? I mean, Lord knows she shows up at his house, eats and drinks the food like it's hers. She's definitely not gone. And Dylan and I talked about it. It's kind of fun because she is the one that knows where all the bodies are buried. And unlike his new wife, she, I think, was his true partner and equal, which I think narcissists like Wheatley, like Richard, can't necessarily handle, but they need. So you can feel that there's a pull for Richard. Like he won't let her go. He doesn't want to be married to her. He wants the easy wife, but he won't let his partner go. There's still like a bizarre spark,
And I love the dance that the two of you play together in a lot of scenes, and the fact that they're always trying to one up each other. They're always trying to win every single interaction. And
like
one of those moments one of those moments that really comes to mind is when she shows up and she's just taking wine from the wine cellar and he comes down and they're having an entire conversation and they're smiling at each other, but underneath that they're seething and they're really just thinking about how they can pull one over on the other one. And so what was that dance with the two of you in terms of figuring out the balance in a lot of those scenes and a lot of those moments? Because you're playing the dialogue in one way and yet you're playing the actual emotional tonality of the scenes in a completely different way together.
Well, it was really fun because he absolutely adores playing. He's unafraid to try just about anything, which is really fun. And with that scene in particular, it was amazing because it wasn't, I think I added a line to the end that, like, I just added a tag because I felt like it needed it. Just because there is sort of an intellectual one-upmanship that they have. There is a chess, a power play that they have. And she does know that she's the one that can speak to Richard this way. And when he says, I don't like people taking my things. It said, as written, it said she grabs another bottle of wine and walks away. And I decided, no, I think she would say, I know you don't. And then just walk away. Just like, I know how far I can push you. I know what I can take. I know when you're being ludicrous, and I know I'm the only person in the world that can talk to you like this. Like, there is a part of her that's actually, I think it's a 50-50 split. I think she knows she holds a position, a place in Richard's heart that's safe, and that she can push him farther than most anybody else can. But I also think she's aware that Richard's a wild card. And in any moment, her children can be in danger. I kind of decided very early on, based on how smart Angela is, that she probably has had thoughts or wondered if Richard had any hand in Rafiq's death. Because she knows, she has a vague idea of what Richard's into. So, and she also knows that he's a wild card, and if he can off his father, I think she knows what he's capable of. So I think she holds him close because she also wants to make sure that her kids her kids that are alive don't get hurt or aren't in trouble. So, it's a really bizarre dynamic.
And with the loss of Rafiq in her life, how did you want to play that emotional trajectory, particularly when you have the scenes with Chris Maloney? Because the two of them, that's one of the things that causes her to have the feelings that she doesn't anticipate when she's trying to play him at the beginning, is because they have this shared trauma that they're both still processing, even though they're at different stages of their grief. So how did you really want to carry that forth through her as a character?
Well, it's interesting. I liked that. I found it complicated, but I liked that their connection was, sort of initially through grief. The interesting thing, and the tightrope that I found interesting to walk, was knowing that she was the cause of the grief. I was like, how do you pull that? How do you pull that off and not be diabolical? And I decided early on, and had a talk with Eileen about it. I was like, I don't feel like Angela's evil. I feel like she's made some questionable choices, but I don't think she's evil. And she said, oh no, she's not. She's absolutely not. But she has made some choices that have left her on maybe the wrong side of things. And so half the audience should be rooting for you, and half the audience should maybe hate you. Well, we don't know, once we find out that I was that I didn't necessarily call the hit on Stabler's wife, but that, in the heat of the moment, I said some really funky things that I think most every mom would probably say. But you don't say them to Richard Wheatley. You know what I mean? Without expecting, she's not naive enough to think that he might not follow through on her wish.
And it's interesting because when you look back at a lot of the scenes where she's playing one version of herself but keeping a lot hidden, there's actually not too much of a tell. Were you intentionally thinking of her as someone who's incredibly adept at keeping secrets because of everything that she had to learn how to do and navigate through her marriage with Richard?
I did actually. I really, yeah, that was a very definitive choice. And again, because there are so many things going on with her, I was like, okay, how to approach her without making her a sociopath, because I don't think she is. And that would have been one choice. I could have decided, and it was interesting because initially when I discovered that she may sort of be the villain, I was like, okay, well, I don't want to play a villain who's like waxing her mustache and like the obvious villain. I want it to be a surprise. So my choice very, very early on was I'm going to play everything she does authentically, authentically. And that way, because I do believe even villains think they're doing the right thing. Um, and so that way, at the end of the season, if in fact we stick with the storyline and she does end up being the villain, um, it's a surprise for everyone, you know. But the interesting thing is how it read. I noticed the fans were like, I wonder if she's the ringleader of the whole thing. She seems like she might be in control of the whole thing, which I loved. I love that they were like, she's smart enough that she's probably running things.
That's amazing. I also feel like they're so good at concocting every possible outcome and
They
reading every tiny
are.
detail.
Oh, it's amazing. I love the theories. It's actually really inventive. I was like, guys, you need to be on the writers' team.
Also, with her as a character, we really only see her through the lens of her family, and that's obviously in a huge part because that's so important to her and that's her motivation in everything that she does. But did you actually want to think of her as having this whole life that we don't get to see on screen, or did you think of her more as someone who's actually living a very isolated existence because it would have been very difficult to get close to anybody and being married to someone like Richard because you almost don't want to bring them into that circle?
I thought of her as very compartmentalized, and I think your point is exactly right. That's what I thought was like even with her friend, the lawyer who she brings in episodes 7 and 8. He's a good friend that she couldn't tell. She couldn't tell about a very important piece of her life. Invited Richard over for dinner, introduced him as her husband, and just decided that this was information that he didn't need to know and quite frankly couldn't know without putting him in danger. So I do feel like Angela has led a fairly compartmentalized, calculated life.
And what you managed to do performance wise in those scenes in the hotel is really astounding to watch because she has such a sense of, every single thing around her is a threat at that point. And I think that you internalize it through your performance really well. So, how were you manifesting and thinking about the way that she would be assessing everything around her, essentially knowing what's going to happen, but not knowing the how or the when of it?
It was really interesting because I do think that being married to Richard, who has an acute sense of everything at all times, his awareness, his senses are heightened. He walks into a room and he clocks literally everything. And I sort of imagined for her being married to a man like that, and again, being as intelligent as she is, she knows how much danger they're all in at all times. So I gathered that she had developed that sense of things as well. So looking out the window, knowing how many people are guarding her, that's not enough. He's going to get through. I know him. It's like I don't know. I think she unbeknownst to her, I think she was wise to adapt Richard's sort of paranoia and heightened awareness.
And there is that point at which she says that there's no way that her son could have had anything to do with the death of someone when he's been part of killing an undercover officer. Do you think that that was part of her compartmentalizing things, or do you think she ever allowed herself to think about the possibility that actually he could have been a hand in it and he could have done it?
I think the human psyche is so crazy. It's funny because I toiled with that particular line a little bit, and that storyline a little bit, because again, Angela's intelligent, but I guess intelligence, and where I finally arrived, is that intelligence doesn't mean that you don't have emotional blind spots. And I think her emotional blind spot is her family, for sure, her children, especially. And she knows that Richie Jr. is not necessarily built for this life, for the mob life. She knows that he's a sensitive kid. She knows that he's not necessarily as strong as his sister or as strong as Richard. And it was interesting because I thought there's got to be a part of her that hopes against hope that he isn't a part of that awful happening. Like, I think she hopes that Richie wasn't a part of that. But I think that I sort of played it internally that there was a sense of denial and hope. Like, I can't vehemently say I know for sure that he wasn't a part of that. It's like I prayed that he wasn't a part of that, is kind of, internally where I was coming from. It's like, he can't be. He couldn't be. I can't digest that. I can't process that. So I'm not going to allow that to be true right now. And it flies in the face of how smart she is. It actually, I was like, initially I thought, this actually makes her look kind of dumb, a little like unintelligent. Come on, woman, you've seen what's going on around you. You've seen how deeply embedded your children are. Come on. But I guess it speaks to the depth of mama bear denial and love, you know.
And then in the final episode, she has one of the worst days that any character on screen has ever had in being poisoned, not just once, but twice.
Right.
But what I was interested about with those scenes is there's a different impact and a different effect on her every time. The first time it happens to her in the bathroom, there's nothing in her body at that point. It's physical convulsions. And the second time that it happens, her body has kind of already been fighting something. She's been in a hospital. She's hooked up to an IV. And so there's a different type of response that her body has. So how did you figure out the different physical elements of how you wanted to play both of those two different scenes, even though the same thing is happening to her?
Yeah, well, I that was one that made me so very nervous. It's funny that I had no lines, but I was like, oh man, if you play a poisoning scene badly, like, I did my best to poison, prior to this poisoning scene, my last one was on bones. And, I did it okay. Yeah, it was all right for network television, but I was just hell bent on getting this one right. So I did research on Novichok just to see if there was any footage of people actually, being poisoned, in real time, as, macabre as that is. I was like, I want to see what this nerve agent actually does to people. So I didn't find much footage, but I did read a lot about it and thought, okay, well, now I'm going to go and look at, films or TV series. I think there was a British TV series that they did the story about the poisoning.
The Salisbury poisonings?
Yes, exactly. So I watched a little bit of that series. I was just watching snippets of how other actors did their poisoning scenes. And I was like, okay, so it can't be like super I've got to figure this out. And I think the one that resonated with me the most, ironically, was Joffrey's poisoning scene in Game of Thrones, because it was so horrific. And I loved, there was a little choice moment that he has, because it's brutal. He's turning blue. But I loved, there was such a fear in his eyes as he was looking up at whoever, I don't know whether his mom was holding him, but he was looking up terrified. And I thought, okay, so I want to have that moment at some point in time. The eyes, we're going to, Fred Berner, the director, was like, we want to go all the way there. Eyes rolled back in the head if you can. And I was like, absolutely. I want it to look as gnarly as possible. I also decided that Alka-Seltzer was the way to get that foam. We tried we tried a few things on set, and I was like, does anyone have any Alka-Seltzer? I've done this one time before and that worked. So, it's interesting because the Alka-Seltzer actually kind of helped me get there, because once you feel that the foam bubbling up, it sort of does the work, and choking on that was kind of easy to do. And then that sort of helped lead to the eyes rolling back in the head, and, and like a hand being kind of tense and, seized up. But the thing that I stole from Joffrey's poisoning scene was coming back to and looking panicked and then leaving again. So that was kind of fun. And then I was like, okay, now she's got this hot shot, like Morales has shot her up with another drug in the second poisoning. That's completely different. So she's just dipping in and out she's lolling in and out of consciousness. So that, so I was praying that they worked. So I'm glad to hear they did.
And you were mentioning Bones there, and one of the things in any television show is that there's always dialogue that's coming at you at the last minute. And for a show like that, some of the dialogue that you were having to deliver was incredibly complex.
Oh
And
yeah.
so, did it evolve or give you a different type of skill set in the way that you're now able to take dialogue and maybe not even necessarily have the full context of that dialogue and figure out how to mold it into a performance very instantaneously?
It actually it did help. It helped strengthen that muscle for sure, because and especially for me, Bones helped with learning technical terms on the fly, because I mean there were so many words. Technical terms, by the way, I think are every actor's worst nightmare, because they're hard to remember. Like in real life, I don't wander around saying electroencephalography. But I promise you, I will never forget that word, because I got stuck on it one day, because they, again, flew it in the 11th hour. They were like, we got that line wrong. This is the actual word. So you're going to have to learn it phonetically on set. Um, it's really hard to learn those things. And because we did do that on the fly on Bones a lot, I found it really helpful for the math scenes, which again were another thing that kind of scared me a little bit, because I was just thrown up on a stage and told to, act like you've been doing this for 25 years and that you're comfortable up here, spouting this like insane calculus and math theory like it's nothing, and then and then write it down, and then write down the equation, which by the way I memorized backwards and forwards. So it's, yeah, Bones was helpful in that way for sure.
And then lastly, one of the scenes that I wanted to ask you specifically about was the moment where she asks to see Richard, but she also requests that Stabler be present, because the three of you could have taken that scene in so many different directions. And even within the scene, you still managed to capture so many different aspects of your characters and this very, at this point, convoluted relationship dynamic that the three of them have together.
Yeah.
And, with everything that you were saying about working with Dylan and working with Chris, and that freedom to try different things and fail, what was the journey of that scene coming together and ultimately landing on what we see in screen, but also all of the moments in between when you were really just figuring it out and fleshing it out on camera?
Well, it was interesting because as written, Dylan, I like that Dylan added things that weren't there, which was really, really amazing. Like it was just met. I think the line at the end when he says, "Angela, you're a mess." Dylan just went right after it and said, "Angela, you are a hot mess. You're both a hot mess." Like it was neat, because when we were rehearsing it, actually, by the way, I had just come from the other unit doing the poisoning scene in the shower. So the guys were waiting for me on second unit. I had just come from, doing that crazy scene, and then had to come sit down, bedraggled and completely exhausted, and kind of make sense of this whole thing. So when we did the rehearsal, and one of the reasons I just love playing with both Chris and Dylan is because they're down for the collaboration, and they're down to see where things land and to check things out. And like I started the rehearsal and I was like, am I sitting back or am I sitting forward? Am I sitting back? Am I sitting forward? Guys, which one feels like the right place to start? Just because you're looking at me, I can't decide physically where I should be, because that how we hold ourselves physically is a real good indicator of where we are emotionally. And so, Chris was like, back, arms folded back. And I was like, cool. Okay, thank you. And it was interesting as we rehearsed it, and actually they shot Dylan's coverage first, which I was so glad, because he had the bulk of the dialogue, and he really drove that scene. And it was amazing to see where he went, because he took such delight in tormenting Angela, which I did not expect that amount of zeal and joy, which it was great, because in the moment it caught me so off guard. And I think it caught Chris off guard. Like we were both just like, holy. And it again brought out in me, at first I go in steely, getting ready to tell him that he's an awful human being, and tell Stabler what you did. I've already told him. I want a witness. You tell him. And boy, by the end of the scene, she's on the ropes and not as secure and confident as she was when she walked in.
Well, I absolutely loved everything that you did and the journey you took this character on and the games that you played with us throughout the season.
Oh,
And thank you so much, Tamara.
Thank you so much. What a pleasure. And what beautiful questions.